husband said something to me yesterday as we were doing a bunch of chores around the house. He said, parenting is the ultimate high and the ultimate low. And I could not have described parenting in any other way. So this tutorial is for you, mamas. If you're going through the highs and the lows, the extreme ups and the extreme downs of being a mama, I want to celebrate you. I want to encourage you. This is a step-by-step golden finch, I think it's like an American golden finch tutorial, and sunflower using only 3 colors. It's actually the second tutorial in my new Sketchbook Snacks teaching series. If you can't paint, maybe because the kids are around or you just have a really busy schedule, you can likely, in between the cracks and crevices, pull out your sketchbook and draw. You just need a pen or a few colored pencils, and you can still develop those original ideas that you can then put into a painting. For this tutorial, you'll just need a basic sketchbook. It can just be a dry medium or a mixed media sketchbook. You'll need 3 colored pencils, yellow, green, and violet. And that's actually almost what's called a triadic color scheme. And we'll talk about that more in this tutorial. Being strategic with color and incorporating animals and cheerful florals is a huge part of my artist style, which is why behind the scenes I've been working on my brand new monthly course and challenge. It's called The Original Animal Artists, where I help creatives harness and use the ugly phases of life to create authentic original art that emerges a unique personal artist style. So if you want to create purposeful, meaningful animal art and you're a visual artist, so use acrylic paint like me, or maybe colored pencil, or pastels, or watercolor, this is where I merge technique with the creative process. I walk students through my creativity system that they can repeat over and over again for creating their own unique original art that surfaces their artist style and that they can continue to develop each month in the Artist Challenge. So I have my waiting list open, and I have a link to my Original Animal Artist Course and Monthly Challenge down below if you want to look at that in the description. But guys, without further ado, let's get drawing. All right, so like I often do when I'm drawing, I have my 2 printed reference photos right here. One I'll use to reference detail and color, while the other one I'll mark up all over. Now, you do not have to do this unless you want to, but depending on how complex a drawing is, I'll either use that second reference photo to mark up all the shapes and lines that I can pull out. I'm doing that right now with my purple Copic marker, sometimes to help me replicate those lines and shapes back in my sketchbook. I'll number them and repeat those same movements. And or another method that I also talk about in my free sketchbook drawing and shading system, linked down below, is I'll separate this reference photo into 4 boxes for my modified grid system. And then 1 box at a time, I'll draw in all the shapes and lines in my sketchbook. Again, I go into a lot more detail in the sketchbook drawing and shading guide linked down below. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to be referencing this outline here of all the shapes and lines, and also referencing color and detail and value from the other reference photo. It's time to open up that beautiful sketchbook if you already haven't, and grab a drawing utensil. It's up to you. I am going to be using 3 Prismacolor colored pencils for our almost triadic color scheme: Parma Violet, Grass Green, and Sunburst Yellow. You can most certainly erase Prismacolors if you press lightly, which is what I'm doing right now, to create a plus sign. Roughly separating my page into 4 boxes. Above the horizontal line is where I'll place the bird, and below that line is where I'll start drawing the sunflower, which I'll use ovals just to find the rough placement of both. Now, to help us get the correct perspective, we're going to use that stem of the sunflower. So we really need to draw that in here And a little tip, whenever I'm drawing tube-like structures like this stem, I'll use one line to find the placement, and then to get the width, I'll draw 2 parallel lines going around it. I'm going to use one oval for the front area of the sunflower with the petals and the center, and then one oval for the green leaved area. By the way, if you missed it, this is an American gold finch sitting on a beautiful sunflower. Now with this little bird perched on top of that sunflower, I'll leave an inch maximum gap between those ovals that I'll start drawing for this bird. So I'll use a larger oval for the body and then a circle for the head that's a little bit off to the top left, because that bird is looking the same way as that sunflower, to the left and down. I'm going to use an imaginary line to cut that bird in half, a very helpful line to help us find that tail. Now this is the first shape that will help us start to create space and depth, because we don't see all of this tail, just the bottom. We'll begin to draw it behind the sunflower and behind the bird. And to do that, to help me create that illusion, I created for the tail those 2 short angled lines. And speaking of angles, I'll do that very same thing on the back of the sunflower, helping create that perspective going down and to the left. So I want to have these 2 angled lines on both sides of the bottom of the sunflower. Now a little bit more than halfway down those angled lines, I'm going to create a semicircle for the center of our sunflower. Now give yourself enough room for the green area of the sunflower in the back. Now that imaginary construction line that we drew for the center of the stem, we want that to be placed in the dead center behind the sunflower. So next, once I have that placed, I'll place 2 parallel lines going down along that line. Now, do you want to improve your drawings and actually enjoy the process? Do you want to use your sketchbook more? Well, I actually have my sketchbook drawing and shading system linked down below. A free guide with my tips and methods for drawing any animal with ease, while also surfacing your artist style in your sketchbook. Again, that's linked down in the description, but now very lightly, I'm going to find that stem and that triangle, a leaf that goes off our page. Because of how this leaf is laying, I want to get that perspective right, so I'm going to draw an oval first and then create an angled line to create a triangle. And those 2 lines that come down from that leaf, they attach to the sunflower large stem. But once we have most or all of our shapes down, then we're going to connect them. So I'm going to do that on the bird first and then move down to the sunflower. I'm going to create a slight dip between the head and the body because of how the bird is looking down and to the left. And then I'm going to curve it nicely around this large oval for the body. And it's a little bit flatter at the bottom, right before we make that tail. At the bottom of that bird, I'm going to create 2 lines that are about an inch apart. I don't know where those feet will lie, but I'm going to have them a little hidden behind those leaves and petals. Coming out from the center of that head on the left, I'm going to use a triangle for the beak. Remember, this bird is pointed down and to the left, so it's not just going to be perfectly horizontal. We want that beak pointing a little bit down. Now cut that triangle in half and carry a line out that goes into the center of the face. And on that line, that plane, is where we'll place the eyeball. That tiny little eye is not quite round, but it's also not quite an almond shape, but somewhere in between. So I'm going to find those little slithers. They're almost like thin, long ovals for the tops of both wings, on the left and the right. Now I'm going to add a little bit of width to both legs, and then I'm going to create those parallel lines that are making a very thin little tube for the feet, extremely thin little legs. Now looking at that beak, we don't have a perfect isosceles triangle. We also don't have a long triangle. We have a slightly curved at the end, very stubby beak. So we can always start with those sharper angles and lines. That's very helpful. But we want to press lightly then so that we can erase and make them a bit more curved. That's my tip at the beginning of the drawing process. Start with those straight lines and angles, but don't just leave them. We can use them to create those more realistic curves. Now let's indicate some of these markings using lines and shading. So we have that black marking on the top of the head. I'll use some clustered lines to create that furry area, that separation between the yellow and black. And even though I'm shading, I'm still not pressing super hard. I'm going to start to add one layer of this violet to the lower half of both wings. And now that those legs are placed and pretty much the permanent lines are there, I actually want to move that tail to the left. So I'll add 2 lines to the left of both my original lines, those construction lines, and I'll press a little bit harder with a bit of a curve at the bottom of that tail. I'm going to switch to my yellow Prismacolor for the sunflowers that we'll be drawing next. This is the line that I'll be using to place the petals over top. That plane will help me curve the petals surrounding the center of the sunflower. Now this curved line are the petals facing us, closer to us on the other side of the sunflower. And that third curved line that's parallel to that will actually be the start of where we create those green leaves for the base of the sunflower. So I'm drawing in one petal here, but you'll see my technique for getting them in the right proper perspective. Curving around the center of the sunflower, but coming out down and to the left. So if you watch me first and then give it a try, I'm going to create these lines that always go back to the stem, the center of the sunflower, and they almost look like sun rays, like a sunshine coming out from the sunflower. I'll draw 7 lines total, but it may be more helpful to you to begin with a center line, cutting that sunflower in half that comes out from that stem, and then drawing those other lines on the left and right side of that line. And now what I'll be doing is referencing that first photo that we drew all the shapes on, taking those visual lines and shape cues, translating that into my sketchbook, drawing one petal at a time. So as you watch me draw, you'll notice I won't create these perfectly identical shapes, but very similar. This 70% accuracy is what helps me break out of that perfectionism. When I tell myself I have to make it look exactly like the photo, I just don't enjoy it. I also don't draw very well. But when I allow myself to have like 30% wiggle room to be creative and make things up, now that's fun for me. That's when I actually want to draw in my sketchbook, and I can still make it pretty accurate. And with this sunflower, there's so much room to just be creative because on the far left side, some flowers are folded over, some flowers are curled around, some flowers are just straight out. Now, I just want to make a note here. Normally, when things are far away, their actual size is going to be smaller. That's how we're going to create that dimension and create that depth. But in this case, it's actually quite different. We have larger petals further away on the left side of that sunflower, and the ones that are along the side closest to us are actually much smaller. But another way to create that depth is we're going to have them folded over, facing us, and triangular shaped. So I'll switch to a purple pencil, and that way you can see it better. Now don't miss this part. It's really important that you pay attention to the top and bottom of the sunflower, how we create that circle where these petals are kind of placed over top the far left petals, but then still curling around the side of the sunflower. I'm going to draw those two petals, the one at the very bottom and at the very top that's layered over top part of the bird. That's what I'm going to do now. As you can see, you can erase Prisma colored pencils. It's not a perfect erase sometimes if you're pressing hard, so continue to press lightly. We're still placing our shapes down, which we can make adjustments to later. All right, so that you can see this on your screen, I'm going to switch to the purple pencil, and I'll have these triangular shaped folded over petals that I carefully place in a way that the point of the end of those petals are pointed on the side that they're on. So these top petals are closer to the left and top left. So I'm going to point the end of that petal towards the left, but as I move to those petals below it, they're more on the right, lower right. I'm going to have the end of those petals pointed to the bottom right. Great, so now we have our sunflower petals in. I'm going to press a little harder so we can see the center of that sunflower, going over that line and adjusting it slightly. And then I'm going to move to my green pencil to draw on the leaves on the back of the sunflower. All right, animal lovers, would you like to learn how to paint your own household pets? Or maybe improve the value and quality of your pet portraits so you can eventually accept commissions? Or maybe you really want to master acrylic painting technique. Well, I have what's called the Online Animal Art Masterclass that covers all this, taking beginner and intermediate level artists to become masters of acrylic painting technique, creating pet and wildlife portraits. That's the Online Animal Art Masterclass linked in the description below. But guys, let's get back to this drawing. Now, to help me create these rows of leaves, I'm going to create another parallel, somewhat curved line going in on the back of the sunflower so that we can create these leaves on that specific plane. There's rows that are a little bit lower, closer to the stem, and there's some that are up higher, closer to those petals. With my green colored pencil, I'm going to start on the top row. And if you notice, these leaves don't really curl over like the ones closer to the back. They look very similar to the petals, similar shape, but they're a bit more concave. So right now they almost look like petals, but we'll distinguish these two different parts of the sunflower when we add shading. Now I'm going to move to the back row, and if you watch me draw a few of these, they're very pointy. It's almost like they curve in towards a very thin little long point. And just like the petals, they're not all going in the same direction. The leaves closer to the top are going to go out and to the left. The leaves closer to the bottom are going to go down and to the right. Now again, make this your own drawing, so it's entirely up to you what you want to do with this little problem that I faced here. Because I decided to have my bird propped directly on the sunflower and not having its little foot on the leaf, like in the photo, I didn't know if I should make that back leaf that's connected to the actual stem of the sunflower, or just have it more leaves that are coming off the back of the sunflower. So that's for you to decide. You can see this bottom right leaf. Some of the ends are so thin and pointy that I could just get away with a line to create that. I'm going to use a line to separate those large leaves in the center, pressing a bit harder now. There's not too much detail on those large leaves, but I want to indicate that the one closest to us on our side is connected to that large thick stem. And because I want to make this a balanced drawing, it has too much of a large gap in this lower right corner, I'm going to add an additional large leaf connected to that stem. I have it folded over where we mostly only see the back bottom of the leaf. And in proportion to the leaf that's on the other side of the stem closest to us, I made that bottom leaf smaller to indicate that it's behind that stem. And to really make this look realistic, I'm going to add just one large petal in the center of the sunflower that's layered over top those back petals and the center of the sunflower. And if you look really closely at our clean reference photo without the markings on it, there's a very bumpy surface to the center of that sunflower. So I created the edge to look very wavy and bumpy, and then I'll softly shade that in, filling the entire center with this violet, not pressing very hard, and also getting the areas between the petals. That still includes that center. Now, I really like to do this at the very beginning, but there is just so much to go through. So now I want you to take 3 deep breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. It's actually best to have a longer expression through your mouth, but make sure they're deep inhale, deep exhale. Now, this is what I love about the yellow-violet combination. They're complementary colors. These are colors that love each other. So what I'll use for shading over the petals is I'll use a bit of violet, and I'll also press harder on my yellow colored pencil. So that's 2 ways I can create that shading. That's why at the bottom, closer to the base of each petal, on the petals further away from us, I'm going to use a bit of violet to separate each one. Now, these little gaps between petals are not large. They're quite thin and tiny, but it's an additional shape we have here. So I just want to point out that we can break any drawing into like 1,000 different little tiny shapes. And if you can do that, then you can repeat those same shapes in your sketchbook. All right, creative. So still using my purple colored pencil, we're going to begin shading now, like doing a lot more shading, adding a lot more texture to our drawing. So the goal of when we're coloring and shading our drawing is 1, to indicate any markings, any spots, rosettes, any stripes. Like the marking on this bird, I'm going to use violet very softly to fill in that black marking. I won't press too hard yet, even though that's like the darkest thing in this piece, because I want to gauge how dark to make the lowlights and how light to make the highlights. The second thing we want to indicate with our coloring and shading is where the light source is. So with our colored pencil, where the light is hitting the subject the hardest, the strongest, it's going to be less pressure on our pencil. It's going to be very soft shading. And the opposite side will press very hard. We'll also add lots of layers of our colored pencil. That's how we create that darkness. And by the way, I just fixed up the side of the wing, and I'm going to shade the lower half, a little bit more than half of that part of the bird. The third thing that we want to indicate when we're shading in is texture. Any bumps, any indents, any lines, any grooves, and you put these 3 things together with our beautiful sketch, and that's really what makes it look realistic. Now with my purple, I'm going to fill in the marking on the bottom of the bird's tail, which doesn't fill the whole tail. There's a bit of yellow on the center bottom. All right, so everything I draw, everything I paint is created and inspired by Christ Jesus. And that's why I have a verse for you. It comes from Hebrews 4:16. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in time of need. So I just want to remind you today that God's mercy is so much bigger than any single large mistake that we've ever made, combined with every failure that we've ever made. So, and as a mama, I make mistakes every single day. And in times of need, I feel like I'm always in times of need as a mama. I always need His grace and tons of forgiveness. All right, so let's indicate that light source. And in our reference, it's coming from the top right, meaning the top right of the sunflower and the surface of those larger leaves will be very light. So I'll press very lightly on my pencil. And then on the opposite side, not only will I add more layers, but I'll also press harder. So that's what I'm doing right now. Then in the middle, where those dark and light values meet, I'll press, add a bit of pressure that's right there in between hard and soft. Not too hard, not too soft, but right there in the middle. This medium amount of pressure that I'm applying right now, I like to actually fill in the entire sketch with that medium value first to map out all the darkest values, kind of like when I'm painting with acrylics, applying all those dark values. And then I start applying more layers and more pressure to those darkest areas. But this way I can fill in all the white area, color in the petals and the leaves and the bird, and then start applying those values. Now in a little bit, I'll be using yellow to create the highlights on those leaves around the base of the sunflower. So I'll leave that white, and to create that concave little dip in the leaves, I'll shade that in. So again, leaving a border around the rim of these leaves. Now these three beautiful colors work together very nicely, but they're actually not entirely harmonious. In color theory, there's 7 main color schemes, one of which is called the triadic color scheme. And these create that beautiful, well-balanced, unified color combinations. And this is not a triadic color scheme, but almost. Because these are colors that are equidistant from one another on the color wheel, creating a perfect triangle, if I switched out the yellow for orange, then that would be a triadic color scheme, and it would be a little bit more balanced. Now, mind you, this is a golden yellow, slightly orange, but certainly still a yellow. The reason it still kind of works, however, is because purple is the complement of yellow. Now, all this color planning is what I do when I'm putting together an original piece. Now, I'll be talking about this in depth in my new Original Animal Artists course and challenge. But if you'd really like to delve into color theory basics, I have something called the Creative Color Guide. It's accessible in my online animal art masterclass, linked down below. Now here in my drawing, taking bits and pieces of what I'm seeing in the reference, I'm gonna draw in another leaf and add more shading in that little gap here.
Full of mercy, you are full of grace, you are full of love, Lord, you are for me. You forget, you heal all my regrets. Full of mercy, you are for me. Sin is deep at your feet. I'm here once again, humbled by your love for me. You prepare me a seat, and you call me your friend, who is like our God and King. You have washed me over and over again. You are making me new, yeah. You have washed me over.
Now grabbing my yellow colored pencil, I'm going to fill in the entire bird except for the beak with this golden yellow.
Full of mercy, you are full of grace. You are full of love, Lord, you are for me. You forgive, you forget, you heal all my regrets. Full of mercy, you are for me. Yeah. Oh, wash me, Lord.
Now I'm going to use both yellow and purple to color in these little legs of the bird. I'll use purple to capture those shadows closer to the base of those legs, and then more yellow to fill them in. I'll move back to my golden yellow to fill in the bottom of that tail, and then fill in all the rest of those yellow petals. I'm actually going to continue using that yellow to now add a bit of darkness to the far ends of the petals, but keeping the centers where they start to fold a bit lighter, and then dark again back at the base around the center of the sunflower. Again, we'll use a bit of violet and more pressure on this colored pencil to create that darkness over the petals. Now to fill in those larger leaves, I'm going to move back to my green colored pencil, shading those in ever so softly because they are really getting a lot of light. So I'm going to give all my pencils a good sharpen because by now they are definitely going to be pretty blunt. And then we're going to use yellow to fill in those highlights, those lighter areas we left white on the leaves. Almost forgot to fill in the yellow on the top of the bird's wing. And with a very sharpened purple colored pencil, leaving a highlight at the top, just a small little white gap, and I'll shade in very darkly, very hard around the eye. Next, with my purple, for another layer, pressing a little harder, I'll add more violet to those markings on the wings and on the head. And like we'll be adding shading to the lower part of the petals, I also want to add a bit of shading over top the yellow around the belly of the bird. Very soft, spread out shading, and it's going to be darkest at the very bottom of the bird's belly. Now another subtle shadow is underneath the beak, and it kind of curves around that head. I'll also add another layer with more pressure to the marking on the bird's tail, and then I'll move back to my yellow and add another layer of yellow. Now, because we have some light hitting the left side of this bird and the top right, we're actually going to get shading coming down beneath the beak and then down along the right side of the belly. All right, and now for another layer of yellow. This is how you really get that vivid, bright yellow, just adding layer after layer, just like I do with acrylic paint. Now is a lovely, beautiful, rainy, stormy day, the day that I decided to film this. So this is where the lighting starts to get real dark and then real bright again and then real dark. So I apologize for that if you're having trouble seeing, but I'm going to both shade in the base of these sunflower petals and use the violet to get those indents that we see on sunflower petals. And we'll do that around the base closer to the center. And then, as you can see, what I'm doing now is pointillism. About an even gap between each dot, I'm creating these tiny little circles going over top that light shading we covered over the center of the sunflower. This is both to capture that unique texture and to do something fun and creative. that I thought would break up all the points and lines of this sunflower. I'm keeping these dots about the same size. I'm spreading them out evenly, and I'm also not going to forget those little areas that we can sort of see between the leaves and petals along the side. And when I make my way down to that lower right corner, that's when I notice I need a leaf there. So I grab my green pencil, draw on a leaf, and then shade it in. I go back to my purple color pencil to do more shading at the base, just so lightly, not trying to make it too dark. This violet is helpful in separating these petals. And if you see any gaps that don't look quite right, this can be a great time to draw in more petals or even more leaves. I'm just trying to create a balanced sketch so that one side doesn't have these big gaps or the other is just too congested. So to balance out that left side, and it's pretty consistent with that reference photo, I add in a thin little petal. All right, so now I'm really going to be pressing harder on my pencils, doing the green and the violet and more yellow. And so I'm working on, with my yellow pencil, shading the bases of all the petals. And then, like I said earlier, I'll also add some more pressure shading to the very ends of the sunflowers on the opposite side so that the area that they curl over and are exposed to the light, it's much lighter shading. But then the ones that are not exposed to much light at all, like these little thin petals in this corner, I'll just cover with an even coat of dark yellow. Now I'm saying coat, but that actually applies more to paint. So I think the right word would be layer with colored pencils. Here's another one of those gaps that's bothering me, and I'm going to squeeze in a little petal that we can just see a little part of it behind that larger one. And I'm going to use both my violet to add shading and color with the yellow. I'm going to pick up my yellow color pencil to add yet another layer of yellow all over the green parts. The leaves, the back of the sunflower, those larger leaves, the stem, all of it. I'm going back to my green colored pencil and starting from the bottom where it's the darkest, getting the least amount of light, I'm going to really press hard and working around every leaf, getting inside those concave little ditches that we see, not going over the border, just wherever there's an overlap, creating a shadow. That's where I'll press real hard with my pencil, but still making sure that I leave a light green and yellow border around those leaves where I don't add too much pressure. All right, creatives, so let's place our colors on our sketchbook somewhere, either on your page or on the next page of your sketchbook. I've been doing this in my sketchbook time lately to show me which colors I use. So you can either just color them in or you can color them in and label them. Isn't it just amazing what you can create with only 3 colors? And we could transfer this sketch to paper or canvas and then paint it with acrylics or with watercolor or use pastels using very similar 3 colors. All right, creatives, so here until the end of this video, I'm not going to give any more instruction. It's just a repeat of what we've gone over. You'll see that I add more layers. I press hard on my pencils, getting that color rich and vibrant, and I also separate that upper left leaf. I break it up into multiple little leaves. just like I mentioned, a little bit more in the middle of this video, but if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. I really do try to respond back to every single one of your comments. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful Mother's Day, you mamas out there, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye.
I didn't know I was telling a lie. It's been a long day for sure. How could I resist your smile? Can we move on as before? I could wait for 1,000 years, but it won't do us any good. Will you bet if you get the chance? I know I surely would. When you're away, there's a hole in my heart. Feels like a deja vu. So come back soon, you are my missing part. I know that you'll be you, 'cause you're my sweetheart. When you're around, I feel the sparks takes me higher, sweetheart. Let me be close to you forever, ever, darling. You're my sweetheart. I will stay just to feel your heart pumping next to mine. Do you feel that I'm your missing part? That you're finally right? You got me out of this feverish dream. You are holding my hand. I have no clue, don't know what it means, but I know you'll understand. 'Cause when you're away, there's a hole in my heart. Feels like a deja vu. I know for sure you are my missing part. I know that you'll be you, 'cause you're my sweetheart.